they will be successful for that place, not this place, not our country, not our future. Where we have an economy that works really well for few Americans and not well enough or not at all for far too many more. School teachers working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. People trying to survive on $7.25 an hour and discovering that they can't. Folks who are not able to take care of themselves, their families, and move up into the middle class of this country. That's part of our legacy if we do not change the facts in our course right now. And when we think about climate and the fact that this planet has warmed a degree Celsius just since 1980 over pre-industrial revolution levels, that is not caused by God or by Mother Nature, but by all of us, our emissions, our excesses, our inaction in the face of the science and the facts and the truth, brought home to us here in Iowa in the flooding of the Missouri River that saw 4 times the runoff in the Missouri River Basin into that river from a normal year, the greatest runoff in recorded history of the Missouri River. At the same time that you see in Davenport in the Mississippi River, the highest levels of flooding ever, more than 1993, which was the last record. Going to places like Pacific Junction, where we were yesterday along the Missouri, every single home in that town was flooded over the roof line. Everything within those homes was absolutely destroyed. Luckily, no one lost their life in that flooding, but they lost literally everything that they had. Visiting the farmers who were trying to farm soybeans and corn just outside of Pacific Junction, and there is a lake where their fields used to be. Standing water now 5 weeks after that flood. We understand that these floods, the droughts in my home state of Texas, the wildfires that have been raging at historic levels in California are a consequence of what we have done and what we have failed to do. But we also know that there are 10 years left to us, say the scientists, to get this right, or at least better than it will be otherwise, to ensure that we slow the warming of this planet, that it not pass another 2 degrees Celsius, after which the train is off the tracks. The level of these natural/human-made disasters will be much worse for us, for our kids, and for our grandkids. And the problems that we have today will pale in comparison with the problems that those future generations will inherit unless we do everything within our power at this moment. That means freeing ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, investing fully and wholly into renewable energy, following the lead, frankly, that you have set here in Iowa, not just in biofuels, but in wind, in other renewable energy. Making sure that we take the lead in the next generation of technologies, innovations that allow us, for example, to store that renewable energy, to distribute it onto the grid when we're ready to use it. Some country is going to finally figure this out at a scale that allows it to be adopted everywhere around the world. I would much rather it be the United States of America instead of China or some other place, but it's going to take a massive investment here to make that happen. We've got to allow farmers to make a profit by planting cover crops so they can pull more of the carbon out of the air, open up technologies like precision tilling so they disturb less of the carbon that is in the soil. If every single one of us does our part, all that we can, and set the example, then this country can return to its rightful role as the indispensable nation, convene the other powers of the planet to do their part as well, and then maybe, just maybe, in these next 10 years, and a decade is all that we've got to do this, we can get it right for the generations who will succeed us, for the people of the future. That is our challenge at this moment. That's what has brought us all here together, not for a candidate, not for a political party, but for this country and for those who will follow us in this country. That's why I'm running right now, knowing that Ulysses and Molly and Henry, your kids and grandkids, are counting on all of us to do everything that we can at this moment. I want to tell you in conclusion why I think I bring something to this race that can help us to meet these challenges. In the United States Congress for 6 years, I served in the minority every single day of it. So if I were to get anything done, I had to find Republican colleagues in the majority with whom I could work. We were able to expand mental health care access for veterans to make sure that more of them can get an appointment, see a therapist or a psychiatrist or a provider, and ensure that they have better outcomes and more saved lives during a time of epidemic in veteran suicide in this country. We got that signed by Donald J. Trump, a man with whom I agree on almost nothing, and yet we're able to find enough common ground to be able to work on this together. We protected public lands in the southwest of Texas at a time that this president was curtailing the size of protected national monuments. Got it signed into law by that very same president who may not have known those public lands were protected in the bill that he signed, but nonetheless we were able to get that done by working with Republican colleagues in the House and in the Senate. Worked with my senior U.S. Republican Senator John Cornyn to invest in our ports of entry that connect us with Mexico, define the U.S.-Mexico relationship, facilitate trade and travel, some of it originating here in Iowa, connected to jobs and economic growth, while making us safer in our communities by knowing who and what is crossing in to the United States. I've been able to show that I can work across the aisle to get things done. And in this race that we just ran in the state of Texas against whoever that was, I can't remember his name either, visited every one of the 254 counties of Texas. Did not matter how blue, we were not going to take you for granted or presume that you were going to vote for us. Did not matter how red, we were not going to write you off. We went to some of the reddest places, not in the state of Texas, but on the planet. You can see them glowing red from outer space as we're orbiting the Earth. King County, county seat Guthrie, voted for Donald Trump 96% in the last election. But I hope you agree with me, they are every bit as deserving of our respect, of being heard, of being listened to, of being fought for, of being served. And I had no hope or prospect of serving the people of Guthrie in King County unless I first showed up and listened to them and learned from them, and I did. And in the end, we did not win that race. We were down 2.6%, but we got to be part of something absolutely extraordinary and transformative for the state of Texas. We had, before 2018, ranked 50th in the country in voter turnout. Not because we love democracy less than you do here in Iowa, but we were literally drawn that way. Our state legislature drew people out solely based on race and ethnicity from their congressional districts, diminishing the power of their vote and effectively silencing their voices. Voter ID laws that allow you to use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the ballot box, but do not allow you to use your student ID to prove who you are at the ballot box. We were able to transcend that, seeing the greatest increase in voter turnout, at least in my lifetime, over a previous midterm election. Young people voting at a 500% increase over how they voted in 2014, expanding the number of Democrats who are voting, winning independence in Texas for the first time in 10 years. The last large, reliably urban red county in the United States of America, Tarrant County, home to Fort Worth, went for us, first time that's happened since 1994, and then 500,000 Republicans who voted for Greg Abbott, our Republican governor, on that same ballot voted for me. And we didn't have to trim our sails or curb the courage of our convictions. We talked about every single important issue in the reddest and the bluest of places. And the kicker is, my mom, a lifelong Republican, also voted for me in that election. So we were able to convince her this was the right thing to do. But I think this way of campaigning for everyone, writing nobody off, bringing everybody into the solution, is what we need at this point of maximum division in this country. We have never been so polarized, so hyper-partisan as we are right now. And all of us have our reasons maybe for feeling that way, but we've got to listen to, talk to, and include one another if we're ever going to meet these challenges. Yes, it is important to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020, and I'm all about it. If I'm the nominee, we will do it. If I'm not the nominee, we will do it. But maybe more importantly, January of 2021, this country must come together to face those challenges. There's not enough time left on the clock for us to fight each other anymore. We absolutely have to come together, and that's always been the way that I've worked. It's always been the way that I've campaigned. It's the way that we're running this race now. So thank you for having me in your home. Thank you all for making some time to hear me out. I'm looking forward to hearing what's on your mind having a chance to answer your questions, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. Cynthia's got a mic. If you raise your hand, she'll bring it to you.
There you go, back here.
Hi.
Hey there.
I haven't heard you say anything about nuclear power. I want to know how that fits into your plan.
It's hard for me to conceive of a path to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, to be halfway there by 2030 as our plan calls for, and not to have nuclear be a part of that. So
What size of a part? Because I've looked at this a lot. Climate change is really the only thing that I care about. Because if we don't fix this,
yeah,
we don't have a future.
that's right.
It's 4 wild horses and 4 pale riders. So to me, I mean, it's the only thing that actually doesn't produce emissions when you really look at everything. So I would like to hear you commit to a percentage of nuclear or some kind of meaningful commitment towards nuclear power. Because I'm from Ontario originally. I've seen a lot of lip service to green energy. And when you do the math, at the end of the day, the wind turbines are nice and the solar panels are nice, but they don't actually make that much power. And we have to replace 100 million barrels of oil a day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man, I want to hear you say something nice about nuclear power. And how we're going to pull a lot of
I hear you. So my commitment is to the goal by 2050, getting halfway there by 2030. I just shared with you that I think nuclear has to be part of the mix of the portfolio. Wind and solar are going to be part of that as well. And so I don't have a defined percentage for each. We just have to get there. I do think it's going to have to involve defined limits on the amount of carbon that is emitted every single year in the United States. It's the only way I know to get there. We can use both the EPA's regulatory rule-making authority. We can use caps. We can even use pricing or perhaps a carbon tax to get there. But there has to be an absolute threshold and limit on what we can emit, because it's pretty conclusive to me that we've only got 10 years left to do this. We cannot see if things work. There has to be a defined limit to it. And then that allows this country to decide what way we're going to produce the energy that we need. And it must, as I said earlier, and I think you're saying very strongly, it must also include nuclear energy as well. So thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, we can pass this back. Gentleman behind you.
Thank you. Our granddaughter was one of your fundraisers in your Senate campaign, Jane Heyman,
Oh, great.
and it just gives us a good feeling that young people are stepping up. And your campaign in Texas at that time brought out those young people. We're having trouble here registering high school students that are going to be able to vote. So the 17-year-olds now are the ones that we're having to count on. Those of us that are older now have to look to the future for our kids. And the statement is, what do your decisions mean to 7 generations?
Yeah,
Now everybody thinks in 1 generation.
right,
Me first.
right.
How do we get the young people more active? You've done it in Texas. What do we do here?
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I wish I could take credit for what happened in Texas. We really followed the lead of young people in Texas. We spent a lot of time on community college and university, even high school campuses. And I remember not only did the political experts warn us not to do that. Young people don't vote. You have a limited amount of time and resources. Don't waste them on people who historically have not participated. Talk to old folks and only old folks, because they're guaranteed to vote in these elections. And there's a lot of truth to that. But if I were young, if I were 18 years old, I wouldn't vote either if no one ever showed up and asked me what was on my mind or included me in the conversation. So we made our bet on everybody, including young people, and it really paid off. But it paid off in large part because young people were already there on every issue that I care about, on climate, on gun violence, on healthcare for everybody in this country. It was young people coming to these meetings and holding me accountable and saying, what are you going to do about this? And I'm going to inherit the consequences of the decisions you all are making more than you will, because I'm going to be alive a lot longer than you. They were really pushing this. And I've seen that level of organization for our dreamers, the Marches for Our Lives, these walkouts out of these schools. So a campaign like ours in Texas, like this one nationally, where we don't accept a single dime of PAC money, no help from a single lobbyist, no corporate or special interest contributions. It's all about people. And I can't tell you how many young people came to events and they said, I don't consider myself a Democrat or a Republican. To them, that's so 20th century. I just want to see this stuff get done, and I want to know that I have an even shot of having a conversation with you, and it's not going to be determined by who gives money or what organizations or corporations you're listening to. So I'm going to continue to do that here, and Chris might be able to tell us, how many college campuses have we been to so far? 27?
29 now.
29. So I've been in this campaign 6 weeks. We've been at 29 college campuses so far, held more than 120 town hall meetings total. So you can see that that's where a big part of our commitment is, and we'll continue to follow that lead from young people that's so inspiring to us. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it.
All right, we have some questions here. We have one. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Daul Arjun. Actually, migrated from South Sudan as refugees. And you talk about migration, that I heard you talking about people who are deported and people, the other restriction, the borderline. That is very interesting, but what I would like maybe to hear from you is what will you do actually with the situation that force people to move from their own country? Refugees that are affected, or maybe other people from the border with America are affected because of maybe economic situation or maybe civil war or tribal war, and the one in my country. What is your policy to end this situation?
Yeah. Thank you for a very thoughtful question. I look at the composition of this country, and there are some who can trace their lineage back 10,000 years as Americans. Their ancestors crossed the Bering Strait. Others who built the wealth of this country, kidnapped in West Africa, brought here by force, and created what so many of us are now enjoying today, almost taking that for granted. Others who fled starvation, perhaps my ancestors in Ireland in the Great Potato Famine, coming to this country because there was no other place that could take them. More than 1 million Irish died during that famine, and so many millions more found their salvation here. We talk about Asia, Africa, the Western Hemisphere. Right now, there are kids who are in some cases unaccompanied, traveling 2,000 miles to come to our front door at the Texas-Mexico border. They just found a child 3 years old, unaccompanied, with a telephone number written in permanent marker on his shoe in a cornfield in Brownsville, Texas. Now, his mom did not send him on that journey for any other reason, and that journey was perhaps the only way his life was going to be saved. That's the only way that we'd release Henry, on a journey like that, or make that journey ourselves if there was no other choice. So this country is comprised of people of the planet. It's unique amongst the nations of the world in that we don't define ourselves by race or ethnicity or common genealogy. It's this idea that we're all created equal. And it's an incredibly powerful idea, and it has made us, I believe, the most powerful country on the face of the planet. And for some inexplicable reason, we're turning our back on that idea and our ideal of who we are. When we cage those kids, deport their moms back to the country from which they fled, separate those families, in many cases without any hope of ever rejoining them. When we shirk our obligations to those fleeing civil wars in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Yemen, in Syria, though we are the wealthiest, the most powerful country on the face of the planet, not only are we not accepting our responsibilities, but I think we're turning our back on our future and all of those who will make this a better country by their very presence. I come from El Paso, Texas. It is connected with Ciudad Juarez and forms the largest binational community in the Western Hemisphere. There's 3 million of us speaking 2 languages, joined, not separated by the Rio Grande River. El Paso, Texas happens to be one of the safest cities in the United States of America, and it has been for 20 years. And I attribute that safety to the presence of those immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees. They have made us such a better place. A quarter of those with whom I live were born somewhere else, not just the Western Hemisphere, all over the world, and they've chosen El Paso, they've chosen us. That is powerful, and I'm proud of that. And so I want to return America to its rightful position. The Statue of Liberty, welcoming people who have no other place to go, who will reveal their genius here in this country to the benefit of everyone here now and the generations that will follow us. It means lifting the caps that we have on the number of refugees that we accept. It means following our own asylum laws, which this president right now, I believe, is breaking when he turns these asylum seekers away at our ports of entry. And it also means rewriting our immigration laws for the first time in 30 years, and not doing it as Democrats or Republicans, but doing it as Americans, and doing it in our own image to reflect the genius of this country. That means lifting the visa caps. We ask people to get in the back of the line right now to do this the right way. That line stretches 20 or 25 years in some cases to join family or work jobs in this country that no one else is willing to do. So there's a lot of opportunities, is probably the optimistic way that I put it, given this administration, to get this right. And so I want to make sure that the United States does everything it can, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's to our ultimate benefit to do that. Thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
Over here.
Hey there. So my family spent, for the 2018 elections, and this is a question about female leadership in our country,
Yeah.
working in Illinois' 14th congressional district to get Lauren Underwood elected as the youngest African American congresswoman in the history of our country. And she's one of my kids' role models. So who do you look at as your inspiration or mentors or leaders that are women in this country?
Yeah. So 2 days ago, I had a chance to talk to Stacey Abrams, who ran a heroic race. And who knows, given the fact that her opponent was in charge of the elections, and states like hers and mine of the former Confederacy have a real history and a real presence of voter disenfranchisement and suppression. I talked about Texas being 50th in the country, Georgia not too far behind. She has made it her mission in the wake of that election to ensure that every single vote in this country counts, to ensure that we have a new Voting Rights Act in the United States of America, that we no longer have members of Congress choosing their voters. It's got to be the other way around. Citizen-led, no politicians allowed, redistricting commissions to guarantee that is the case. To look at these racist voter ID laws that I described that we have in Texas and many other states right now. She's a hero to me because she's going to make sure that this democracy, perhaps the most powerful mechanism in the history of human government to call forth the power of a people, she's going to make sure that it works. And either works again or works for the first time, really, given our country's history. And so I find a tremendous amount of inspiration in that and in her, and really want to make sure that I follow her lead and make sure that we allow this country to fulfill its promise. So thank you for asking the question. I
Thanks for
appreciate
your answer.
that.
I appreciate
Yeah. Other questions?
Right here, and then we'll go back.
I appreciated your answer about your thoughts about immigration, but I believe that the gentleman from Sudan was actually asking about your foreign policy stance, isolationist, interventionist,
I got you.
and what we can do to alleviate some of these situations that are sending everyone
Gotcha.
here.
Yeah, great. So this is also a great opportunity. I'm sorry if I missed your question earlier. We can stop going to war all over the world. Every time we do, it seems to cause more war. So if we look at the civil war in Syria, one of the greatest humanitarian catastrophes following World War II, in some ways it was precipitated by our invasion of Iraq in 2003, significantly further destabilizing the Middle East, inviting Iran to do many of the things that they're doing in Iraq today, in Yemen today, and in Syria today, provoking more reactions and responses, including the U.S. service members from this country who are on the ground tonight in Syria. We're in our 18th year of war in Afghanistan with no definition of victory, no end in sight. Thousands of U.S. service members' lives lost, tens of thousands of lives taken by those service members in our name, without understanding the true purpose of our presence there in 2019. We are aiding and we are a co-combatant with Saudi Arabia in the indiscriminate bombing of our fellow human beings in Yemen, bringing almost 7 million people to the precipice of starvation in one of the most water-scarce countries on the face of the planet today. We're cozying up with dictators like Vladimir Putin, who our president says he trusts and believes over our intelligence community, whom our president called after the Mueller report was released, calling that investigation into the attack on our democracy a hoax. He's also cozied up to people like Duterte in the Philippines, al-Sisi in Egypt, and Erdogan in Turkey, and turned his back on our traditional allies and friends, whether that's the European Union or NATO or Canada or Mexico. We have an opportunity to get those relationships right again. At this moment that the world is wondering whether democracy is spent, has run its course, and I think it's an open question in a lot of the world, may soon be an open question here in this country. We need to strongly reassert our leadership and our values on these issues. So I want to make sure that where we can in Sudan, in this transition of power that we have right now after 30 years of autocratic rule in that country, in South Sudan, in the aftermath of Darfur, that we use not our military force, but our diplomatic resources to help those countries heal and come together. I want to make sure that in Syria, in Yemen, in these other hotspots around the world, again, not through the 18 and 19 and 20-year-old service members whose lives are on the line tonight, but through our diplomats, through our economic resources, and through our unique convening power to bring the other countries of the world around the table, that we use that power. Here's a great example. Without firing a shot, without invading yet another Middle Eastern country, without taking a single life, we were able to help stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Now, we did that by working with the permanent members of the UN Security Council, Germany, Iran, many of them not our friends, but to find a way to a peaceful resolution to an otherwise intractable problem. I think that could be a model for how we handle other issues without going to war going forward. And then lastly, I mentioned the Northern Triangle countries of Central America that are sending so many refugees to us now, in part thanks to our intervention in their civil wars in the 1970s and the 1980s, the after effects we are still feeling. We can invest in violence reduction in those countries, a fraction of the cost of a $30 billion 2,000-mile wall along the US-Mexico border. That will prevent families from having to flee in the first place if it is safe enough for their children to be able to live there. So those are some ideas on how we can meet some of these foreign policy challenges going forward. Thank you for the questions.
Just wanted to, you mentioned gerrymandering, and I don't know if you're familiar with the procedure that Iowa uses for redistricting after the census.
Tell me about it.
But it is really an impartial way, because the maps are drawn up by a computer and the legislature just votes up or down. And if they don't accept I think it's the second or third choice, trying to maybe look for more favorable districts for the individual legislators, then it is just drawn by the computer, and it's just an impartial way. I mean, it's just luck of the draw and I think that it would be something that would be beneficial if you were able to use a bully pulpit to propose that for most of the states in the nation, because I do think that that model is a good one.
What do your members of Congress do with all their free time? They're not running congressional Congress. I like that idea a lot. We live in one of the most gerrymandered states, and the districts make no sense at all. You have one district that stretches from Houston, Texas, all the way to just the outskirts of Austin, Texas. There's no consistent constituency involved there, but it is drawn to help the current member of Congress stay in power. So I like that as an example of a way that we can move forward. Thanks for asking the question, making the comment. Yes, ma'am.
You spoke about the importance of diplomacy in improving conditions in some of these countries that are currently sending us so much refugees. But it's my understanding that there's been a lot of trauma at the State Department, and would you comment about what you think should be done in that situation, and if I'm right about it being a situation?
Yeah. It is a situation, and I remember I was on the House Armed Services Committee as well as the House Veterans Affairs Committee, and in the first weeks of the Trump administration, I had the chance to meet with, I believe then, General Jim Mattis, before he became Secretary Mattis. And we were asking him this very question around, a table of my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats. And he said, if we will not fund the State Department commensurate to our diplomatic needs and foreign policy priorities around the world, you better give me another couple of divisions, because we're gonna have to fight these battles and do that with 18 and 19 and 20-year-old women and men from this country, instead of the diplomats that we could fund if we just had the political will to do that. That was astounding to me. This was a prospective member of President Trump's cabinet commenting on a problem in that administration, but really in administrations that had preceded him. If you look at the votes following 9/11 to go to war in Afghanistan, there was one vote in the Congress against going to war. It was a woman named Barbara Lee, who is still a representative of Oakland, California, but we take great pride in sharing with you that she was born in El Paso, Texas. Her mom, in fact, helped to integrate higher education in Texas by being one of the first African-American students to attend Texas Western College. So I remember driving home from work that day in 2001 when that vote took place, listening to NPR, and the news report comes in and says the vote was 434-1 or something like that. And I thought, who is that unpatriotic, un-American member of Congress who doesn't want to do the right thing when it's so obvious to us? And as a member, and I got to know Barbara Lee, I went back and I looked at her speech on the C-SPAN website, and you can tell that there's some anguish. She wants to make sure that she does the right thing and wants to get those who got us and ensure that there's accountability for that and that we stop any future attacks on the United States. But she warns essentially of writing a blank check for war. And how prescient she was 18 years ago, because the authorization for the use of military force that she voted against is the legal underpinning for our presence tonight in Afghanistan, but also in Syria, in Iraq, and Somalia, and Yemen, all these other countries that I just described. Instead, if we had decided to pursue diplomacy in many of these countries, not invade Iraq in 2003, it's hard to argue that the world would not be a better place. We would not have been able to save more lives, but it would require an investment in the State Department, and not just an investment in resources. We'd really have to believe those diplomats could get it done. We'd have to give them our full backing. The president would have to give them his or her full backing to be able to do that. So I think that's critically important for us to get right in the next administration, or else consign ourselves to a future of unlimited, constantly metastasizing war all over the world, because that's essentially what it's been in the last 18 years or the last 28 years if you start from our initial invasion of Iraq in 1991. So I think diplomacy has got to be the answer for us going forward. Thank you for the question.
This is going to be our last question, and we can go outside to say hi.
Yeah.
But
Mr. O'Rourke, when I received Carol's invitation to come here and hear you tonight, I talked with virtually all of my friends in the past week or so, and I asked them, what kind of questions do you want me to ask? And I'm not going to ask any of those. I would ask you, what are you currently reading? Why are you reading it, and what are you learning?
I just finished Killers of the Flower Moon. It's a really good book about the murders of the Osage people in Oklahoma, who for one point in the early 20th century were the richest people on the face of the planet because of the oil resources under the land that they had been forced to settle on, and were just murdered at a harrowing rate, and a crime only really solved, at least initially, by the nascent Federal Bureau of Investigations, and one of J. Edgar Hoover's first big tests as the leader of that organization. It's a very tough book to read because it describes the inhumanity with which we can treat one another, and it's in the living lifetime of some people, who are here today, and that happened in this country. Why I'm reading it, my wife finished it. She said, "You got to read this book," and so that made it an easy decision. I'm also concurrently reading this book called Uninhabitable Earth, which really just in really clear, compelling language describes the changes taking place in our planet today because of our inaction in the face of the science around climate change and what it is doing to us. And to the gentleman's point who raised the issue about nuclear energy earlier, I mean, nothing else is going to be possible if we cannot get this right. And it's why our first major detailed policy proposal outlines how we get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and some of that very much influenced by reading that book. So those are the books. Did you ask another question related to that? What am I learning? Yeah, those are some of the things that I'm learning over the course of reading them. Thanks for asking. A really good question. Appreciate that.
Okay, we're gonna head outside now and have a chance to say hi to people.
Okay, thank you all for having us here today. Really appreciate it. Carol, thank you so much. Very, very grateful. Chris, thank you. This is very nice. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Good job.
Here we go.